going to get us started. Kick us off. By this point, everyone knows the deal. 20 minutes of presentation, and then the Q&A if you have any questions at any point. Our last keynote of the day, very excited about, is Daniele Bolelli of History on Fire. He's a history professor at several universities in Southern California, author of 4 books, host of History on Fire podcast, and the Drunken Taoist podcast. With that, I'm going to go away.
Thank you so much for having me. You guys can all hear me well? Sound okay? Great. Okay, so let's get the ball rolling. The title of my speech today is going to be about how to gain power and wealth by murdering your siblings. And yeah, the obvious question is, what the hell is wrong with you, Bolelli? And I don't really have a good answer to that. It's like, I don't know, man, my sense of humor veers toward the dark. That's probably why I enjoy tackling history in a way, because so many historical events are dramatic and heavy and sad and horrific. And I like to have this light-hearted, weird attitude about it that somehow, I think it helps me when I'm researching so many heavy subjects. It helps me not being drowned out in this otherwise depressive vibe, and then still manage to have fun with the whole thing. So having said all that, specifically where I'm going with this talk today is regarding one of the great contingencies of history, the one that specifically has been at the roots of untold numbers of wars and bloodshed and deaths, which is the problem of succession. Like when you have a kingdom, when you have something along those lines, you have an empire, you have you hold the power of some kind, and you want to leave it to the next generation. In many, many systems around the world, is done within the family, with fathers leaving power to their sons to become the next king and that kind of stuff. Now, one of the issues that come up, speaking of contingencies, is that in an ideal world, you have parents leaving power to their oldest kid. The problem being oldest being the key word. Because what happens is that often parents would have more than one child, and even in places that are very patrilineal, so they only trace through the, like, daughters barely count, they get married off, they only leave power in the hands of a male heir. The problem is, you know, there's the plague, there's accidents, lots of bad things happen. So why don't let's have more than one kid, almost as an insurance policy, right? That becomes your contingency plan right there. It's like, we'll have 2, 3, 4, 5 kids, 2 or 3 will make it to adulthood because, you know, we live in a scary and weird world. Good enough. Okay, now we are guaranteed that we pass it within the family. Problem is, what is if 2 or 3 or 4 or more survive? And at this point, the only thing standing between you being the third born and the throne is a couple of unfortunate accidents happening to your older siblings. Now, I'm fascinated by this topic because of the psychology involved. Because, I mean, there are plenty of examples of this stuff. And actually, maybe I'll take you through the examples first, and then I'm going to try to go into the meat of the topic, what interests me the most about this topic. So in terms of example, I mean, both in fiction and in real history, think about if you guys watch House of the Dragon, the Game of Thrones spinoff, it's all based on this idea, right? This internal fighting within the family for power. And yes, Greta in the chat makes an excellent point regarding how often these internal fights between family members for who's going to be the next in line for the throne, usually the people who pay the biggest price for all this are just average people who want to be left alone, and instead they get forcibly conscripted into an army, or in the course of the war, their fields get burned, their houses get destroyed. That's why, and this is just a tiny aside, if I will allow me this one minor tangent, I'm a big fan of the concept that I refer to as gladiators for world peace. And what I mean by that is that anybody who actually wants to fight a war, wants to have a conflict, get them all in the Coliseum, hand them an axe each, and have them go at it. And that way you have innocent bystanders can sit in the audience and check out the fights without being caught in the crossfire, which unfortunately is what happens most of the time in history. The most of the people dying in conflicts are civilians who want to be left alone. And you would be so much more dignified for some of these guys. You want the throne, he wants the throne, you guys go at it, and we all kick back, have a beer, and see you guys kill each other. That would be a much more civilized way to handle those power struggles. But unfortunately, these folks tend not to be big on that idea. In any case, point being, there's recognizing the problems with the contingency plan when it comes to inheritance. There's a story related to Genghis Khan, where in the secret history of the Mongols, they say that Genghis gathered some of his sons and did the classic thing that, by the way, this is an example that shows up not just in the Mongol story, shows up in various parts of the world at various times. There's debate about which one is the original story, but basically in the Mongol version, Genghis grab an arrow and snap it, essentially saying any one person can be broken, and then grabs this bundle of arrows and shows how you cannot snap it. And that was an invitation to his children to cooperate, to work with each other, so that if they work together, they would be unbreakable. You find, if you guys ever watched the film by Akira Kurosawa, Ran, they have that same exact scene, except one of the sons wanting to make a point, grab the bundle of arrow, push it against his own knee, and snap those as well. Which, had somebody done it with Genghis Khan, I don't think they would have left the conversation alive, but you get the message. Is the desire of the older generation is, why can't you guys all get along or work with each other, and that way the line of succession is smooth, there's no drama. And for the Mongols, occasionally work. Like among Genghis' children, there was one of them at one point was very sick, and shamans try to divine the future, and they basically came up with the answer that in order for the Khan, the one who had inherited the Genghis throne, to survive, one of his siblings would have to be sacrificed. So this is kind of a big deal, right? You have to, at the drop of a dime, is like, your brother is sick, time for one of you guys to decide which one of you wants to die. And the funny thing is that it does happen. One of them volunteers to say, yeah, okay, I'll do it. I'll sacrifice myself for my brother, just make sure to take care of my family. And it's pretty amazing. That is not the norm in history. Rather, the other story tends to be the most common. One of the first episodes of History on Fire I've ever done is the story of the Persian expedition, the 10,000, as related by Xenophon. And the premise of that story is that you have a civil war in Persia between Artaxerxes II, who is the legitimate guy next in line for the throne, and his younger brother, Cyrus. And Cyrus, rather than accepting his older brother's rule and just living in a life of luxury, decide to start a revolution, get into this giant war, and eventually dies in the course of the war. This is a recurring theme that shows up over and over. How many war of successions have there been based on this idea? Countless, literally countless in history, and in all places and continents and time periods, from Shaka Zulu had some of this stuff happening. You get in Japan, during the Warring State period, you see this stuff happening over and over. And so that's one of the things that, there are cases where maybe the previous king had so many children with a bunch of concubines that you literally have massacres once the new person comes in. Like in the Persian story, there's Artaxerxes III. The first thing he does when he assumes power is sending out hitmen to kill 50 of his brothers. 50. That's not even like a murder. That's like a flat-out massacre of a whole bunch of people. So Point being, I don't think, I mean, we can go on with examples all day, but I think you get the idea here. And the idea being that these wars of succession are, I don't want to say the rule, but they are definitely not that much of an exception to what happens in human history. Because the old king thinks, I want to have a bunch of sons to make sure that at least one of them can inherit the throne, which sounds like a sweet plan, except when it doesn't work, it really doesn't work. And now you have this siblings warfare taking place all the time. The reason why I find this topic fascinating is because of the psychology involved. And this is where I would be curious to get also some of your opinions on this concept. Because think of it this way. All you have to do, let's say you're the second born or the third born or something like that. All you have to do is let your older brother rule, show that you're loyal to them, let them know. And you don't show it just when they assume power, throughout their life, you understand that your place is being second in line, third in line or something. And you just reassure them that you have their back, that you're loyal. And at that point, all you got to do is let him handle all the worries of the kingdom. And you can just retire to a life of luxury. You can be made a local governor of something if you really want to flex some political muscle. But you can really just pretty much have the best life that most people, at least from a material level, that most people could possibly enjoy. You have access to wealth and privilege without really a whole lot of responsibility. So on the surface, it makes you wonder, why would anybody want to engage in unsavory activities such as murdering your siblings for the sake of getting to the throne? Wouldn't it be easier just to pat your brother on the back, say, hey, when you need me, I'm here, whatever you want, and then just kick back, stick your feet in the pool and be fed strawberries all day? Yes, and a good point, unless you're out of 50 Persian brothers. That's why I make a key point about letting your brother know that you are their best friend, you are their ally, you got their back, and you show it throughout your life so that they don't suspect you of being a potential somebody who could try to unseat them. Because that's really the only danger, right? If your older sibling thinks that you have a plan to get rid of them, they decide to pull the trigger first and eliminate you first. But if you have spent a lifetime building a relationship where you have shown loyalty time and time again, odds are pretty good that your older brother is going to want to keep you around because they like you, because they trust you, because you have shown that you got their back over and over again. And at that point, you have a life of luxury ahead of you. That, however, is not the common pattern. That tends not to happen that often. And many, many cases, you have this siblings war breaking out with unfailing regularity. And so the question that it raises to me is why do people do it? Why do what's the psychological mechanism that makes somebody get into this bloody, ugly, murderous fight with member of your own family in the name of assuming the ultimate power? You want the crown, you want it all. And everything I'm going to say from here forward is my speculation, okay? So, of course, your theories are as good as mine in that regard, and I'm just going to suggest a few ideas, but by no means am I assuming that what I'm going to suggest is the one and only version? There are probably multiple reasons why this stuff happened. One of them, I think, has to do with the nature of, there's a book by, let me preface by saying this. There's a book by Gabor Mate called In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. And it's a book about addiction. He's a book, he was a medical doctor. He worked a lot on treating addiction and stuff like that. So he's approaching this as a medical problem, but I think it can be related to our story, in the realm of hungry ghosts. The idea of the hungry ghost is someone who has to consume that something that they need, but they never get satisfied. they are always hungry. They are always wanting. In Ojibwa mythology, there's a story of this demon, the Wendigo. And the Wendigo is a cannibal creature that eats other beings, but is never, the more he eats, the hungrier he gets. And there's something to that in regards to some people feel that their existence has no, it's not about money, it's not about wealth, it's about meaning. They want to leave a legacy, and you don't leave a legacy being number 3 in the empire. Nobody will remember you. You need to be the top guy, and nothing other than the top job will satisfy you. So that may be part of what's going on, is that in some way, some of these folks are slaves to fame. They are slaves to, I need to find a sense of meaning to my life that is not found simply in enjoying life, in having a good life, you know? That's part of it. And, you know, you still see to this day, I mean, you see people who are billionaires who can never stop working. And it's not even that they love their job that much sometimes, it's that without it, they feel empty. They feel like, what do I do with myself all day? I don't know how to just sit back and be happy. I don't know. So these are people that they may live in all the luxuries all around them, but they can never enjoy the houses they live in or taste the amazing food they eat. It's all, there's all this drive to, I need to see my value grow. I need to feel that there's meaning to what I do. So that's one idea. And I think my guess is that a lot of it, this ego-driven vibe, has to do with fear of death, you know, fear of the fact that, you know, chasing this illusion of some everlasting fame that is not going to be there if you just have a great life. Many of these people don't know how to have a great life, how to enjoy life, how to sit back and all of that. So that's one reason. You know, again, I'm not saying that's the one and only, but it's definitely part of the thing. And yes, I agree. You know, Jamie makes a point about kings. Why don't they just nominate who the next person in line is? Yes, and in some cases they do, and it works. The problem is the second in line doesn't necessarily, once the old king is gone, doesn't necessarily respect that, and they figure, well, if I kill that guy, I can be next, or I kill his whole family, and anyone he can nominate, and I can be next. And so that becomes part of the problem, right? So in a way, you would have to, if you are the old king, you would have to raise your kids in a certain way, raise them to really push relations between them, and for them to have an attitude where my win is not built on your loss, where we are helping each other, of just mutual cooperation, of really create loving bonds within a family. And if you're not able to do that, well, then you're really screwed up as a parent, and you definitely screwed up as a king, because you probably cannot afford to have surviving siblings who hate each other when the prize is so rich. So that's part of the deal there, you know. And some of these is that they, you know, the idea of running an empire is a very different job by being a good parent or being a good family man or all of that. Think about somebody like Marcus Aurelius, who's considered one of the best emperors of Rome. What a horrendously crappy job he did raising Commodus. So, and in the process of that failure, not only failing as a parent, but even in a way failing as an emperor, because then you leave this empire that you spent all your life building in the hands of a clear incompetent who screws it all up. So that attitude, teaching somebody, teaching your family, being there to create bonds, being there to create the idea that without cooperation, nobody can have a win. You know, you can have a win today, and tomorrow your other sibling murder you. You know, there's never safety. There's never, you can't ever hire enough bodyguards unless you have a situation where everybody's happy with the outcome. Then whatever happiness you can gain for yourself is very limited and temporary, and you always have to watch your back. So that's part of the gig, you know. That's definitely And I agree, you know, what in the comments they're saying regarding some of them wanting to prove themselves. And that's what I was referring to regarding that ego factor at play, that desire for your name to last forever, or things that may be tied to fear of death and to the realization that just about 99.9999% of people who ever lived, nobody will ever know they were there. Once they are gone, a generation or two go by, they disappear completely from the historical record. I think some of these guys who grow up with luxury and everything else don't do well with this. They want their existence to be something more than that. And that may be, and again, I'm emphasizing that one. I don't believe that's the only reason, but it may be one of the reasons why people feel this need to, you know, there can only be one kind of vibe, you know, where, I don't know, I feel that the philosophical is very interesting to look at mindsets that are built on a zero-sum game where for me to win, you have to lose, versus mindset that are built on, hey, whatever solution we come up with, we both need to walk out of this happy, or at least happy enough with the compromise that we can live with it. If we can't, there's a real problem, you know, and then no amount of conflict is going to solve it unless you kill everybody on the other side. So having said all that, we are just slightly past the 20-minute mark. I could go on forever, but I'm gonna shut up in that part and then ask you guys for sort of opening it up for Q&A, questions, not just questions, even just your thoughts on this. Like, you know, because I suggested a few theories for why this seemed to happen so much in history. Maybe you agree, maybe you have other ideas instead. I mean, it's undeniable that this happens a lot in history. The question is why? When on the surface, it seemed like there could be better ways to handle it.
So usually this is where I go through and pull out all the questions that have come up while you're talking, but you've actually answered them while you've been talking. So I'll start us off. Well, a couple more accumulate. So part of the trick is convincing everyone else to follow whatever line of succession comes up. It's not just about family dynamics. And Western Europe has this concept of primogeniture, which is enforced by, you know, the theocracy of the church for most of the Middle Ages. And that's sort of where a lot of us come from in terms of our assumptions about how succession should go. There's I don't necessarily agree with this, but you could take the point of view that, you know, that's just what everyone should do. We should have a theocratically enforced succession plan. Do you have any reactions to that? Well, more questions come up.
I guess one thing that would be interesting in these discussions, for if you are the one who's living an empire and you have 4 kids, is to ask all of them, is like, would you even want it? I mean, there's a ton of responsibility, meetings, drama, pressure, all sort of crap, and you can join pretty much all the benefits by not doing anything in terms of wealth and power. And if you want something passed, all you have to do is being good with your other sibling who decide to take up the job. I mean, in some way, it should be the other way around. It's like you should be begging somebody to take the job. Because the logical thing would be for everybody to say, no, man, you're good. You take care of that. I'll just sit here by the pool, you know? And once in a while, I need something to get done. So I'll knock on the door and ask if you can please. But, you know, other than that, enjoyed. And if somebody's a little more driven and they want that responsibility, everybody pat them on the back, go like, whew, I'm glad you took that one. So I don't have to deal with it. So I would be interested in that regard. Is like those converse, because we assume that the throne is the best possible outcome. And it's like, is it?
Yeah.
I'm not that convinced that that is the ideal place where somebody could or should be.
So we've got a question from Peta, who asked, to what extent do you think the idea of single rule ends up being the result of pressure from below?
You mean like having people wanting their daddy figure who handles the empire kind of thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, probably people like dictators, people like cult leaders, people like anybody who can tell them, I'm gonna restore our place to the old glory and I have all the answers. And there's a reason why people like it, is we live in a scary world. And anybody who looks very confident, very, don't worry, children, I'll take care of it all, is appealing. It's a very appealing thing. So definitely, even in places where, I mean, even if you look at like a system in the US where we think the president has a ton of power, and he does to some degree, but he doesn't have nearly as much power as we think it does. There's so much bureaucracy and other lesser known figures who play a role in the whole system. We still like the figurehead, the idea of this one person who's there in charge, and their personality somehow it's going to drive the whole thing. So there is definitely a factor of that people want someone to identify with. They don't want some nameless bureaucracy, that's for sure.
So Asha asked, sort of going off of the my comments about um, set succession plans. What are your thoughts about the basically enshrined Ottoman practice of required fratricide? It seems like they institutionalized the sibling fighting more than other regimes.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, yeah, we can make it, yeah, the gladiatorial event is like, you're that bad, is like, okay, get all your brothers today, everybody, let's meet at 3 and have beer, and we watch which one of guys, let's throw a sword in there, everybody in the cage, let's see who survive. That's one way to do it, I guess.
It seems like possibly the most cruel possible system.
Yeah,
Where it's like you have unlimited concubines in the harem, and then all the kids
yeah,
fight it out.
yeah, let's just kill them all. Like, why not? That makes the job easier at that point. I think Robert has a hand up.
Yeah. Let me do that. You and
yes, I agree with James. By the way, I'm looking about the idea of elevating your chosen successor as a co-ruler during your lifetime. I agree. That's probably a good start, so that you start the transition in life, and by the time you're dead, this person already has an experience and people are used to them ruling and all of that. So yeah, that's
even primogeniture systems, that's always the most successful, but you don't generally have a kid who's old enough or whatever. It's such a crapshoot.
Yeah, definitely.
Robert, go ahead.
Yeah, you talked about about the situation where a ruler should just ask his children. That happened. There is a story that when Oliver Cromwell was offered the protectorate in the 1640s, he asked his family whether he should accept, and a hand went up at the back saying, well, as long as it's not hereditary, then accept it. And the person who supposedly said, then accept it, as long as it's not hereditary, was his son, Richard.
Right.
Who, in the end, was appointed the successor to his father, having specifically said on a number of occasions that I'd rather be a pig farmer.
Yes.
Which is kind of ironic. I think it's also to bring this together. When we started today, we were talking about the Stuarts and the Tudors, and that their kind of exigencies, failure to plan and prepare for their succession, was a big problem. And that also we haven't talked about what people like Cromwell believed they called providence, which is kind of, another word for exigency, another word for contingency, that, things happened as a result of providence, and that if they were meant to happen, then anyway, yes, it has happened, and apparently they didn't listen to him. Anyway, so it's been a great evening. Thanks for your speech. Cheers.
Yeah, I agree completely. And that's a great example that you bring up. And the question that I would like, what puzzled me is that why is that not the norm? Why is that not what everybody does, right? Because yes, I mean, it seems like simple enough that is like, yeah, let's all talk it out here. Because again, there's a way to, when you have that much power and wealth, there's no reason why you can't have everyone in the family winning, quote unquote. Everybody walking away with a lot of what they want and their needs met and everything else. So then I think it really is a failure of human intelligence when you see that at play, because it's like, it's one thing when you have zero resources and, you know, there's one meal, one of us is gonna eat, the other one is gonna die. Okay, well, I like you and all, but I'm afraid we're gonna have a knife fight. I get that. But when you're in a situation where it's not a life or death, resources are super limited, only one of us survive, when it's a situation where you are, everybody can conceivably have a good life. It's just a matter at that point of figuring out the priorities, figuring out ways to make sure it's like, okay, I want to walk away with this from this situation. What can I give you to make sure that you also walk away happy? You know, and think of, rather than purely on yourself, think of it from everybody's standpoint. And I'm not even saying it in an altruistic kind of way. I'm even saying it from a selfish standpoint, because the reality is that you are not going to have what you want for real or in a lasting way or in a safe way, unless everybody else at the table is somewhat satisfied with what they get. Because if they are not, they are going to be trying to come for what you have. And so in that regard, to me, it's like, that should be what a good ruler does, is you build these with the people who are candidates for succession from day one, from when they are born, you raise them in a certain way. But I guess in that sense, it's probably easier to rule an empire than to be a decent parent.
Well, I mean, I think it's tough to instill. What you're just describing is just good leadership. And any, you know, leadership is a skill and not everyone has it. That's for sure.
Yeah, I'm always amazed when I look at both in history and in fiction sometime. Well, or there are places where it's halfway. Like last night, I was watching again the series Narcos about Pablo Escobar and the cocaine trade in the 80s and all of
Yeah,
that. And it's always fascinating to look, and that's just an example, but in a bunch of situations, it's always fascinating to see how things that could have been solved with halfway decent communication and thinking about making sure that the people around you are taken care of quickly spiral out of control over ego, over poor communication, and suddenly are at each other's throat, gunning each other down. And granted, you know, people who build cocaine empires are not known for their diplomatic tact, but still, that unfortunately applies not just to Escobar, it applies to most of human history, where the ability to be diplomatic, the ability to make sure everybody is satisfied with an outcome, the ability to build a philosophical framework that is not a zero-sum game, seems to be a lost art in that regard.
yeah. So Luke said, shallow question, who would win in your personal ranking of sibling slaughterers?
Like as far as who's done the worst, like which one?
You could go by body count or you could go by creativity. It's your choice.
I mean, yeah, if we go by body count, there are quite a few candidates that are pretty solid. One that I find hilarious, again, hilarious, take my word for the word hilarious, has been horrific, disturbing, and murderous. But like hilarious in that sense, there was Hideyoshi didn't have children initially during the Tokugawa, like right before the Tokugawa period. And so he had picked a nephew of his as his adopted son, as like, oh, you're gonna be the next line. However, later, Hideyoshi does have a kid, and then he's like, oh, wait, but I nominated so-and-so as the next in line. Now we got a problem. So he say, hey, change my mind, dear nephew. You're not next in line. You actually need to commit ritual suicide right now. And while we are at it, because some members of your immediate family may be sore about it, they all need to die. And if they don't show the proper enthusiasm for ritual suicide, I'm just going to have them all killed, including a lady who was about to marry this guy, the nephew, had never even met him yet. And so she literally just arrived, and you're like, well, you're part of the family. You need to die too. Sorry. And yeah, so that's one of my, I don't know if using the word favorite is appropriate here, but
Do you think did you think he made that announcement at the baby shower or
right? Where it's just like, oh, by the way, sorry, change of plan. Ritual suicide instead.
thanks for the pram. Now got some bad news.
Yeah, yeah. The one thing that I see Roberto brings up, why did the rates of succession, wars, and rivalry decrease the closer we get to the modern age? I think because monarchy as a system start dying out, it become less common. You do have those pesky elections and things like that, and the more democratic system, which of course takes the wind off the sails of that system of succession, which is it stays within my family. I mean, never mind the fact that when you look at like US politics, right, you had like two different Bush who became president. One of them was governor and the candidate for president. Clinton was president and his wife, that is the... So, I mean, some of these things still end up staying within families. There are political dynasties that essentially rule. But, you know, elections change the dynamics a little bit.
You don't have to kill anyone to take over, essentially, and you're gonna get your chance every 4 years or whatever it is.
Yeah, and yeah.
Any other questions? Let's see. We got 4 more minutes. Anyone want to sneak in one more? Let me look back and see if I missed any.
Did somebody else raise their hand? Can't tell.
Doesn't look like it.
Oh, okay.
Also helps that if you don't win an election, you aren't put to death. Yeah.
Again, I'm in favor of gladiators for world peace. I would love.
Absolutely. Oh, we do have hands raised. Okay. Gonna go with Greta.
So I had put it got lost in the chat, but the idea of the win-win, like it just feels like that's a much more modern idea. And it was just sort of like, if I'm not winning, I'm losing. And so clearly I have to win and I have to make sure everybody else is a loser. So how much of that contributes to all of this?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's kind of what I refer to as the zero-sum game mentality. You know, my win, it's built on your loss. And I think, I mean, even today, I don't think is a common way of thinking is the other way around. The idea that we can all get something we want and we should make sure that everybody at the table is satisfied with the outcome is still not that common. And I think has never been that common, but has always existed. Because I mean, when you look at like a ton of, for example, Taoist philosophy, a lot of it is built on the idea of non-opposition of force, not on this idea that I need to crush you to get my way, but is built on, I mean, even the symbol of Taoism, right? The yin yang is built on these opposites, not in conflict with each other, but merging with each other and working together. So the idea of there's a way to look at it that is not like if you think about the yin yang symbol, to me is like the zero-sum game would be one side entirely black, one side entirely white, a line drawn right in the middle, and you have these two opposing forces clashing with one another. And instead, the yin-yang symbol is about like this flowy curve where the borders are fuzzier, they are constantly changing. There's a little bit of black in the white, little bit of white in the black. And this notion that is clearly not a symbol based on conflict, but on cooperation. And so I do think that that idea has always existed, but I don't think it has ever been particularly popular, because it's more complicated. You know, it's so much easier to just say, I just need to kill the other guy and I'll get what I want. You don't have to think that hard about it. Whereas if you're going to try to figure out, okay, I want to get these, but I want to make sure you also get these. Let's work together. It takes a few more steps. Now, if you get that done, it actually leads to longer and better outcomes. But it's a little more hard work initially. That's why, I mean, it's the same thing as in parenting, right? Where it's like a parent will yell at their kids and be like, you do as I tell you. Maybe you get away with it for the moment and it's simpler because the kids will have to listen and there's not much discussion. But the second you turn your back, they're going to break whatever rule you have set up. Whereas if you talk to them and you establish a dialogue and you start having the same values and you see each other point, it will become easier not to have a conflict down the road. But of course, that's a lot more work initially. Yeah. That's my interpretation, at least.
Well, my daughter arriving home upstairs just let me know that we're out of time. So thank you, Daniele, so much for this talk, and thank you everybody for coming. I do want to remind everybody there is an after party, which is BYOB. And it's just a meeting. You can find it back in the main schedule. Thank you to all the speakers. You guys have been just great today. It's been another great year, and you've all been wonderful. And thanks so much to the attendees. You guys have, obviously it'd be really boring if we were just talking to ourselves. So thanks so much for coming. And with that, I think we're gonna wrap it up. Great.
Thank you so much. Have a good one.